Here's the
to
problem.
the product that you have in your house.
It's not just about making an educated decision, because it doesn't matter what the intentions of the company are even. The simple concept of it is fundamentally flawed.
This is Bad Voltage, episode 65, out on Thursday, the 21st of April, 2016.
Oh, fancy.
I know.
Forward-looking date.
Good.
Because today isn't that day.
This Magic is planning for you. If you're not listening to it on that day, that's because you were late, or we were late, or possibly both. So, on this show, with me today, we have Bryan Lunduke, Jono Bacon, Jeremy Garcia. I'm Stuart Langridge. What's on the show?
Well, we're going to talk about how we can kind of attract and foster the next generation of open source enthusiasts.
We're also I'm going to do a review of a device called the Mod Duo, which is basically a Kickstarter campaign for a guitar pedal, which you can have lots of virtual guitar pedals that live on it. It's quite cool. It's powered by Linux and open source. We're going to get into if it's actually worth getting.
And to answer a whole bunch of questions that we had about the Mod Duo, we're talking to the CEO and founder of the project, Gianfranco Ciccolini.
And then we're going to get into what can be generously described as an outright row with each other.
Got a little contentious there, didn't it?
Where we're going to basically talk about products that have services attached, and what happens when those services go away. Specifically talking about, what was that thing, Jeremy? I forgot what it was called.
Revolv.
The Revolv. And Bryan Lunduke, who's not on this intro right now, is extremely wrong about everything. So that'll be fun.
And now, Bad Voltage. So as many of you may have heard, and by the look on Brian's face, chomping at the bit there, I'm sure he has, Nest recently announced that they were going to kind of brick a device called the Revolv that they acquired. At least let me finish the intro before, because I can see you're bouncing up and down like a little kid. So
isn't bricking a binary notion?
Well,
it's either bricked or it's not.
They've since kind of changed their tune a little bit.
Soft bricking.
So what they announced was that the company they acquired called Revolv, who makes a device called the Revolv, which was acquired in October of 2014. Which basically what they made was a home automation hub that had a bunch of different radios, some of which were never even enabled. And what they said was after a certain date, that device just wasn't going to work. They were going to kind of remotely just brick it. What they've since said is that anyone who bought one, they'll give a full refund to. So I wouldn't consider that a brick. It's kind of a refund, and you just don't get the device. But that brings kind of a bit broader question, regardless of what happened here, around what happens when you buy a device that depends on someone else's servers, a.k.a. the cloud. And I don't think I can get Brian to keep quiet any longer. So
I'm guessing before we go broad, we're going to get pretty specific. Mr. Lunduke.
Yeah. Okay, two things. First of all, this is not Nest that did this. This is fucking Google. Google bought Nest. Nest
so it's not, though.
Revolv.
They're running them as complete. But no. Regardless of what your opinion on Google and Nest is individually or aggregate, Nest is a completely separate division with a separate CEO. And
it is.
The way Alphabet is now structured, they are not part of Google.
So, but it's Alphabet.
It's not Google.
Yeah. So it's
okay. You could maybe say Alphabet, but Alphabet is a holding company for a bunch of companies. Right. One of which is Google.
It's a holding company for a bunch of companies.
Dude.
But this is how holding companies work. That's kind of like saying, like the companies that
so when
own
Geico
CNN,
does something wrong, you blame Berkshire Hathaway. That's not how holding companies work.
No, it's not
at all.
No.
So we know you know your issues with Google, but why don't we focus on what Nest actually did? And then,
Nest did a lot of the same shit that Google does, which they are not related in any way whatsoever. So here's the thing. This is not that Nest sucks. This is yet another example of proving how goddamn stupid all of us are as people, as consumers. The fact that all of us have bought into one type of device like this or another just just drives the point home that we're willing to put ourselves in this position over and over and over again to allow a company, either through negligence, maliciousness, or just plain laziness, or perhaps they go out of business, to completely brick the devices that we own and take something that should be like, I don't know, as simple as a light bulb or a thermostat and should just always work, and just destroy it and make it useless without ever even knowing that that's going to happen. We are retarded that we keep buying into this. I keep buying into this. I've written articles about how stupid this is, and yet I keep goddamn doing it. I keep buying devices that are connected to proprietary app stores and silos. I keep buying services and devices that are tied into things like this. All of us, all four of us have done it in mass. And everyone else listening, I'm sure, has too. And we're just stupid for having done it. And there's so many examples. It's getting ridiculous about it. And this is just another example.
Hang on. So to provide another perspective, right? There's no doubt that there is the question around the notion of a company discontinuing a product and bricking it, right? And there is the question there's that question, and then there's the question about how well they handled it. Look, products at some point stop working, or companies decide to discontinue it. That's just how the world works, right?
It's not how the world used to work.
It's not how the world has to work, or how the world used to work. Jeremy's right.
If you build a platform, at some point you may decide to not continue supporting that platform.
There's no reason why any of this stuff has to be a platform, though. If I buy a light bulb, it doesn't have to be a platform at all.
And that's another... But hang on.
Let a light bulb be a light bulb.
Hang on. That's another good question, right? Is like, should these products necessarily feed into a cloud, whatever? There's the question around whether it's bricked or not, and then there's the question around how they handle that bricking. It sounds like the way they handled this bricking was they decided to do this, they notified their customers, and they've issued refunds. So,
no. Hang on, bear with me. What happened was they decided to do this.
Really?
They notified their customers. Everyone set the internet on fire for a month, and then they went, "Oh no, we'll offer refunds." We never meant that we just reach out and fuck you up. What we'd actually going to do is give you the money.
So
back.
they were going to brick it. They were going to brick it, and then they didn't come out the gate with the refund.
No, not at all, man.
Not only did they not come out of the gate with the refund, they came out of the gate with basically, in 3 weeks your device will stop working. Thanks.
Yeah,
that's terrible.
3 weeks notice, and they basically stuck a big neon sign on the top of their building which said "LOL," and that was it. Gone.
Yep, nailed it.
Last statement cannot be verified.
If you got a call from the company which said, "Look, we've decided we can't run this anymore. We apologise. We're going to give you the money back. So you're no worse off. You've been part of the experiment. It didn't work out. Sorry, here's the money back." People would have gone, bloody company. And that would have been the end of it. The reason everyone was so annoyed is because they decided to reach out and turn off your device, which they didn't have to do, and not provide any recourse.
How old is this device?
About 15 minutes. I got shoes older than this. It's ridiculous.
Right.
A couple of years.
There seems to be like a statute of limitations in my mind, in the sense of like, the Nintendo Entertainment System lived for about 25 years, and then they decided at some point, Nintendo decided, we're not going to build these things anymore.
Right. No, they didn't. They decided we're not going to build any new games, and we're not going to build any new consoles. But if you own one, because many people still do,
you can still,
they still work.
You can still use it. And I get that. You shouldn't necessarily have to issue refunds. Why did they... So, is this thing useful without the service, is the question I've got.
It could be very much so, yes.
Could it be?
Because basically,
yes, they have explicitly decided to make it not useful without the service. So killing the service kills the device. Right, but they didn't have to.
Right. So there's two different questions: could it be useful without the service, and is it useful without the service?
Exactly.
Different questions.
Yeah.
So what I think, there's multiple things I think people were upset about, and I think to take a little bit of a step back here. You didn't buy the device from Nest. You bought it from a very small startup, and it turns out they only sold around 1,000 of these. It was under 1,200 was the total number of hubs the company sold in its entirety.
Yeah, so you're talking about over 1,000 people. Right.
But you're talking about an ultra small startup. If you buy a hub from a startup that small and they go out of business a year later, I don't think you're surprised. This was a very much an early adopter device, and had Revolv gone under, while people would have been a little annoyed, they would have said, I knew the risk of buying something from that small of a company going in. It is what it is. I think that the multiple things why people got especially annoyed is because there are only 1,000 of them. The carrying cost to Nest would have been very small. And Nest, the company, is a $1 billion company predicated on you trusting them to support their devices. So from a PR versus cost standpoint, I don't know. And they said the decision came right from Tony, which I who knows what he was thinking. But the other thing is the 3 weeks thing seems insane to me. If they would have said, we're no longer selling these devices, we haven't sold them for a while, in 9 months or a year, the service is going to shut down and we'll transition your hub to a local-only device, no one would have said anything.
Right. That's pretty much standard practice, right?
They wouldn't have had to give refunds. They wouldn't have had to do any of that.
And as I understand it, and Jeremy, you may know more about this, but this is not like when Microsoft did the Zoom, they had plays for Shaw Music, and they just turned off the servers, which means that you could no longer authorise your music and so on, but it didn't stop your device working. But they weren't, I don't believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't think Revolv were just going to turn off the servers. They were literally going to reach out and brick your device. They weren't taking away the endpoint that it talks to. They were going to reach out and turn your device off. Even if the Archangel Gabriel delivered you a copy of the Revolv servers, it wouldn't matter because they bricked your device anyway.
So I don't own one, so I'm not positive. But my understanding was correct. They weren't going to just turn off the servers because, like I said, because it is a device connected to your network, with a bunch of different. It has a Zigbee radio, it has a Z-Wave radio, it has Bluetooth. Yeah. Because it's a hub with those things. Had they not disabled it remotely, yes, it could have been useful. My understanding is they were going to disable it remotely.
Right, assholes.
So this is like
this brings up multiple questions now. Have we reached a point of outrage where people, and let's take Nested as an example, need to say this $300 thermostat comes with a guaranteed 3 years or 5, whatever the numbers are. I think is there room for some kind of standards industry organization that promotes a kind of works offline brand where even if the company goes away, if you're certified to that standard, the device, you might lose some functionality, but will get a baseline functionality. So obviously a Nest, if Nest went out of business, you couldn't control your Nest remotely because it requires their server. But the timer would still work, the thermostat would still work, etc. And it would be a clearly delineated set of features, certified.
Well, it begs one other question, which is psychologically, are you buying the thing, or are you buying the service, or are you buying both? Now, I think we'd both agree that you're buying both, right? That if you go out and buy
from the company's perspective, you're buying the service, and the hardware happens to just come in the box.
Right, and I think from the consumer's perspective, a lot of consumers see it as you buying the thing. So, like, a lot of consumers here are like, "This is terrible. This device that I bought isn't going to work anymore because the service is going away." It seems like there needs to be better clarity around. It sounds like the more this kind of thing happens, I suspect the industry is going to settle on some kind of standard ways of assuring customers that this isn't going to happen. Because what worries me about this more than anything is, this could have been prevented based on what you guys. I mean, I didn't know as much about this as you guys, but this could have been handled so much better. Like, I don't have any issue with people building products that fundamentally connect into services. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if consumers don't want that, then that's fine. But if you're going to shut down a service, you have to do it gracefully. You have to do it in a way where it
doesn't negatively impact them in any way whatsoever, other than that online service doesn't exist. It may be a high bar, but I'll tell you what. You go back to, I had a Sega Dreamcast. My Sega Dreamcast was bitchin'. It had an online service. The online service at the time was an amazing online service for game playing. Yes. Yeah. The online service went away fairly quickly because only about 12 people used them. Apparently, me and Jono were a significant percentage of it. It was awesome. So they shut it off gracefully. They let it kind of peter out. Did it affect my Dreamcast in any other way other than the specifics of that service? No, it absolutely is. If I buy a piece of hardware, that has a piece of functionality, such as the ability to play a game, turn my lights on and off, what the fuck, whatever. it better keep on doing that for as long as that piece of hardware functions. If someone remotely changes some functionality that makes that stop working, they screwed up and hurt me. And they did it knowingly.
See, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that if I buy a thermostat which controls stuff in my house, that the service that I'm purchasing is essentially an add-on from my perspective. It may not be from the company's perspective, and it may suddenly become difficult to configure my thing when you can't have the iOS app bounce all its commands off the remote server. I accept that.
So it should be able to connect directly, correct.
But for something like an Amazon Echo, you could make a reasonable case that the thing that this device does is send what you're saying to Amazon servers and get a response. Right?
But see, here's the thing.
That's a key part of what it does.
It's local functionality that is possible.
Yes.
If local functionality is possible, and they intentionally make it so that it will not be possible because they want to tie you into a service, then that is morally and ethically wrong.
See, I don't think it's wrong. As long as they're clear in delineating what is what, I don't think it's wrong. I think what's wrong about what some companies are doing now is they're acting like they're selling you one thing and they're selling you really something else. That's why, if it was up to me personally, what I would like to see is this $300 web-connected thermostat is guaranteed online service for 3 years, and if we go away, these are the services that will still work. So then you can make an educated buying decision. Yeah. And for some amount of the people, they'll say, you know what, I don't want a web-connected internet thermostat, and that's fine. But then for me, who might want one, I can say, okay, if I'm going to spend this $300, A, what am I getting for how long am I getting it? And if they go away, what am I still getting? So then I have a baseline for what the device does and how long it will do the cool stuff.
You can imagine,
and then I can make an educated decision.
But you can imagine a company saying, as part of their "what if we die" declaration, they can say, "If we die, the server software becomes open source" or something like that. So it's not going to happen while we're a company, but you can keep the device running afterwards. Some other company can spring up and work with that, and that could be something that people actually compete on. So when you go into a shop and see two devices and you say, okay, I see three devices. One of them has no "if we die" declaration at all. This one says, "if we die, half the stuff turns off." This one says, "if we die, half the stuff turns off, but you can turn it back on again if you know what you're doing." Then, as Jeremy says, you can make an educated choice about it.
You need a certified works offline consortium. Let's get this thing started.
I agree completely.
I would say, though, that what's, to me, the most important thing here is making it clear to consumers that what you're buying is a service that happens to have a thing that you plug into your wall, as opposed to the other way around. So, for example, if let's use Dropcam as an example, right? So, Dropcam, fundamentally, you can use the Dropcam and you don't have to use the service as well, right? You don't have to purchase the editions, but the way in which you access the Dropcam is via the Dropcam website, right? So you go to the Dropcam website and you don't have to spend any more money than the Dropcams that you've purchased, and you can use your Dropcams. But fundamentally, those devices are dependent on the service. As far as I'm aware, you cannot access those Dropcams from a local network.
You can't.
Right?
But they don't need to be.
No, bear with me.
I have web-connected webcams that do the exact same thing as those cameras that aren't reliant on some weird service.
Hang on, let me finish. So what I'm saying is, in my mind, like the way the Dropcams are sold, at least the perception that I had when I bought our Dropcams, is that you're buying the cameras and then you can also plug it into a service. Whereas the reality is, because you cannot use those Dropcams without the service, you're buying a service and you happen to be buying some things.
I don't think they're very clear about that, especially
not at all.
And that clarity, in my mind, is that's the major issue. Well, that to me is the major issue, is that because the idea that you buy a service and that service goes away, I don't have any issue with that. There should be a graceful transitionary period. But it's the fact that it's that difference between buying the hardware and buying the service. That, to me, is the biggest issue.
Because it turned out that what you'd done is you'd bought a car merely in order to get access to petrol, but nobody told you that. The thing here is, I think, Brian, I agree with you that it's entirely possible to build a camera which records to some kind of local storage or some kind of storage on your LAN, whatever.
Happens all the time.
I think it's fine that Dropcam have not built that. They've built a thing with a bundled service and it only works with the bundled service. But if they had to be clear about that, if I die declaration says in it, if Dropcam goes away, your stuff stops working, and because of that, we believe that we can provide you a nicer UI, or we believe we can provide this at 40 quid less money than our competitors, then fine. Again, it's about the educated decision.
Right. It is, yes.
There ought to be what happens if our company dies? What happens if we kill this product
Here's
to
the problem.
the product that you
not,
have in your house?
It's not just about making an educated decision, because it doesn't matter what the intentions of the company are even. The simple concept of it is fundamentally flawed. If you have, let's say, for example,
but the market
Xbox
gets to decide that, not one person's opinion.
Here's the thing. We again, the market needs to decide that, but the market has proven, and I am part of that market, that we are all completely retarded on this issue, including myself. If you have an Xbox One and you simply cannot connect to Microsoft servers, you can't do diddly shit with your Xbox One. You really can't. It is a completely useless hunk of box unless you can connect to Microsoft servers. Even if you're not playing games online with people, you can't do shit with it. And that's not an unusual device in this regard. We're talking not just this Revolv device. We're talking set-top boxes. We're talking everything. We're talking so many devices.
But what's your solution to this? You've identified that this is a problem.
Here's the thing.
Are you basically expecting people not to build?
The solution is extremely simple. The problem isn't that we have brand new functionality here. It's that we're going about the same functionality that we previously would have had, playing music, watching a movie, etc., and making it so it is not only complemented by online services that may provide additional features and content, but we are making it fundamentally dependent on them.
But that's not a solution.
No, hold on. That's the situation we have right now. We have made them fundamentally dependent. Therefore, it doesn't matter if Google or Revolv or whoever says we have a if we die clause. It doesn't matter, because what if your internet connection is disconnected? What if their servers go down? What if they just fuck up for a while? What if they get hacked?
What's your solution?
There's a billion different things. So simple, very simple. Do not make the functionality fundamentally dependent on a constant connection or a regular connection to a specific online service. Allow them to operate either offline or through an optional local server that you set up yourself. Simple.
That is first of all not a solution.
That's how things used to work.
Because it is how things used to work. But we used to like communicate by carving into rocks.
But we
don't do that anymore.
This wouldn't change that. But this wouldn't take away any functionality from us. It would just allow us to have more control, and it would make it so our stuff isn't bricked.
There's a few reasons why that isn't a solution. First of all, some products, the service is the key part of the product.
Right.
And expect that. So first of all,
in the case of Revolv, they offer absolutely nothing that couldn't be provided if they simply provided an open source version of their server to us.
Yeah, but hang on a second. The second thing. So
there's no actual product there.
Hang on. The second thing is that if you're basically saying the requirement here is that the service, even if it's a fundamental part of the service, if that goes away, you should be able to operate the device without the provision of that service. So therefore, you need to provide a local feature,
sure,
right?
Yep.
That is going to so significantly increase the cost that no company will ever consider doing that. The risk is easier for them to just.
But we've always done that.
To just go away. No, we haven't always done that. There's a lot of products and services out there.
Again, Dreamcast. We've always done this.
Yes,
this is a brand new
fundamentally
phenomenon.
Before the internet. Didn't rely on the internet. Congratulations.
Not before the internet. Not before the internet. Now let's use Xbox as an example, just because picking on Microsoft is fun. Xbox One. Xbox 360, original Xbox. Original Xbox started adding a lot of live features to connect to the internet, to have multiplayer, to have all sorts of functionality, right? That's very online centric functionality. Not required. As it went, the companies decided they wanted more control over what you did and your upgrade plans. They wanted to be able to do forced obsolescence. They wanted to be able to force upgrades. Ergo, make people dependent on an online service in order to keep the hardware working.
What you're saying is totally correct. No one disagrees with that. The problem is you can't then create a law, which makes Nokia 3210s illegal because they didn't do anything without the phone network. Which is what you're describing. No one
Yeah,
can sell a
it
phone
is.
anymore because if you take the network away, it's a brick, which it is.
And also-
I guess I'll alter what Jono said. That's not a solution. I'll alter that slightly with it's not a realistic solution at all. It
Why?
maybe is
Yeah.
a solution.
It's just
because
not
that's-
gonna happen,
That's just
dude.
not how things work. I mean, you could wish a lot of things happen, but what you have to do, and I think, is come up with a realistic plan that is potentially theoretically in this world in our lifetimes implementable. And
Being
what you've
as-
done is create a fairy tale,
Being as
which
what
in the
I'm
land of
talking
Bryan
about-
would that be perfect? Is that going to happen? The chance is literally zero with certainty.
So
that's
what I'm
not a
talking
realistic
about
solution.
existed just a few years ago. So it's not like this is something we have to come up with that's
Right, but
brand
by going
new.
by what used to exist, dinosaurs used to exist. Jurassic Park's
Well,
not happening.
that's
They're not going to exist
ridiculous.
again.
See, that's
But
the same
you
sort
gotta
of
look
argument.
forward, not look back. And
That's
you
the same sort of argument that people use to talk about let's not have gay marriage because then horses and people are going to start getting married. Let's not get extreme with it.
we're not
talking about
it's completely
I
different
cannot
because
imagine how
but
that.
because
No.
the point is that the internet is a inherent part of society today, and
This
people are
doesn't take
building
away from
products
that.
hang on. People are building products and services that want to utilize that because it's convenient. People want to have connected homes. This isn't an antiquated perspective, and you just say, well, this is always the way we've done. You know, we wouldn't do it this new way. The point is that the internet is a service that people want, and people are building that into
And
their
that's
products.
great.
And the market is deciding that they want that.
And that's great. That's totally fine. But you don't have to make a device so fundamentally dependent on it that it's a dead piece of hardware the
what's
moment
gonna
a
happen?
connection is
From
interrupted.
all of our perspectives, I think we all agree that you shouldn't make that device. Going under
Yeah.
the fact that
Right.
companies
It's an
are making
immoral
those
act.
devices, I think it would behoove companies and consumers to at least know what they were so we can make decisions. So that I've never had an Xbox, so I have no idea. If Xbox doesn't turn on, even with a disc in it, if you're not connected to the internet,
it kinda
Sony
sorta
could make
turns on, but not really.
Sony could make an explicit point to say, you know what? PlayStation does, and they can compete on freedom. And if we can convince people that freedom is important because we all think it is, the free devices will win and the non-free devices will go away.
In the same way, I think part of the reason
Right.
why Android has become so successful is people like the freedom that they have in Android that you don't have in the Apple world.
Right.
Arguably, the iPhone is a more beautiful user experience than Android. Even today, Android's a lot better than it was. But people have decided with their wallets that they want the freedom that Apple doesn't provide.
And I think that's where we're disagreeing here is that we all want the freedom. You want to wave a wand and make it go away, and we want to realistically make
No.
it happen.
I'm not talking about waving a wand and making it illegal. What I'm saying is it's morally and ethically wrong. The companies are doing something that is ethically wrong to do. They did something specifically that hurts people. And to make it worse, we as a community of people decided, yay, give us that thing. And we keep doing that over and over again because we're really friggin' stupid. I'm not talking about waving a wand and fixing it all. I'm just saying that the environment we have is completely wrong and we're stupid.
I don't think we're stupid. I think people are making decisions where this just isn't that big of a deal to them.
To be clear,
honestly, I bought the drop cam. If the service goes away, I'll be a bit knocked off for a while. But I don't think I'm stupid. It's not that big of a deal.
I think you're stupid for having bought but not any less stupid than me for having bought in some of these things.
Nobody purchases a device because they like the fact that the company might reach out and screw them up, right? It's not a selling point. You decide, I want this device rather than that other one. I think even someone who's educated enough to look at a thing and say, okay, that company can't screw me, this company can, might elect to buy the drop cam who can screw you rather than a camera which records to local storage because the drop cam is cheaper or has a more convenient user experience. There are trade-offs here, right?
Yeah,
I still think a lot of people don't know how much their device is tied to an online service, which is why I think companies should be much more clear on what happens.
Yes.
I think people don't
Companies do lie
realise
to
they're
people with
making
great
that
regularity.
trade-off.
Yes,
I think it's the labeling. Yeah.
Yes, I think they would maybe make slightly different decisions if they did know.
Right.
And I would just my view as well, as much as everyone defines their ethics in different ways. I think we would all agree that companies that put a product out and then they shut it down, if they don't handle that transition, there's varying degrees of whether you think just shutting the service down is unethical, and some people may think that the way they handle it is unethical.
And the way they designed it was unethical.
The thing that I am not a fan of is basically defining an ethical code and then mandating it across the board for something such as this. I think for
Who's
equality.
mandating it?
No, I'm just saying that, like, you were talking earlier on as if one option should be that companies shouldn't be able to do this.
No.
One potential solution here would be
do it. It's not be able to. They shouldn't do it.
Right, but the question is how do you actually enforce that? And
I'm not
you can
talking
either
about enforcing it. I feel like you guys are having a completely separate discussion here. I'm not talking about creating a set of laws to enforce this. I'm just saying they're unethical and we're stupid. I mean, that's really what's going on here.
I believe that the sky should be green, but it's not going to happen.
Well, no, the important distinction there is I would like in the future...
I didn't say what it should or shouldn't be. You keep coming up with these different things that I'm not saying in a discussion we're not even having.
I would like in the future to be able to buy devices which have a great experience and don't screw me up.
Yes.
Talking about what companies should ethically and morally do but not doing anything about it is aiming for a future which I get to be smug about the fact that companies were wrong, but I don't actually get any devices.
No. We talk about this. We make this loud. This is how the companies learn what to do and learn what will and won't be acceptable to people is talking about it, is making a big fucking deal about it. We get out there, we do a podcast, we do articles, we talk to people. We may not be holding 28,000 person rallies in New York parks, but we're making a big statement about it right here. And hopefully someone will listen to it and go, yeah, you know what? That's right. Maybe I'll write a letter. Maybe I'll write an email to the companies that are doing some of this sort of things. And maybe it'll slightly encourage them towards doing the right thing. And maybe, as Jono and Jeremy both said, maybe some companies will decide to take up that flag and go for that market that will convince other companies to do the same thing. That would be great.
And we're going pretty long, so I think we should wrap it up. But that actually raises a question which I think would be a really good segment for a future show is how effective is activism? Because I think going out there and talking about it is effective in some ways, but then you've got other approaches. There's market forces, there's environmental forces and whatever else. It'd be interesting for us to talk about, like, continuing this discussion, if you wanted to have a sea change in how companies make these products, what's the best way to accomplish that? As a guitarist, a pretty common part of your setup are guitar pedals. These are small metal boxes that provide an audio effect such as reverb, delay, distortion, or something else. Many guitarists string a bunch of these pedals together into a pedal board so that they can have lots of different sounds to play with. Some guitarists buy a multi-effect unit which has a number of different effects built in, but usually can't be expanded or upgraded. Then, there is the Mod Duo. The Mod Duo concept is pretty cool. It's a hardware unit that you plug into your computer and connect to with a web browser. You are then presented with a virtual pedal board and a library of different pedal effects. You can drag a pedal from the library onto the virtual floor and drag virtual cables to connect them together in different ways. You can then save these different settings into banks that can be called directly from the Mod Duo hardware unit, so you don't need a computer to use it, such as when playing live. The concept of the Mod Duo is cool, but the way they're building it is cool too. It's powered by Linux, and it uses the open source LV2 plugin standard, which is an open equivalent to something such as the VST standard in the proprietary world. All their code is up on GitHub, and the team are even using Linux to build it. They've created an SDK and a community where anyone is welcome to create new effects and upload them to the Mod Duo. They've even been really active in the Linux audio community in general. So, how well does it work? Given that the Mod Duo started out life as a Kickstarter campaign that I backed, wasn't really sure what to expect with the hardware. The team have outdone themselves though. An incredibly well-built metal enclosure, 2 inputs, 2 outputs, headphone jack, dual screens, and more are packed into the unit. This thing will definitely put up with the rigors of the stage. Software-wise, this is still early days for the Mod Duo, but it's pretty solid. There is a huge library of effects and amp simulators, and dragging them together to create different combinations is simple and works really well. Audio-wise, the quality of the plugins, like guitar pedals in general, is variable, but there's some great sounds to choose from. There are definitely some bugs and the odd audio dropout here and there, but you should bear in mind that I'm part of the early access Kickstarter batch, so I think that's pretty much to be expected. The team, though, are driving through these bugs and regularly delivering updates. Given the incredible work of the team so far and their openness to feedback, bug reports and improvements, I have no doubt that this thing will be rock solid by the time the final production units are out the door. What really excites me is that the Mod Duo could potentially jumpstart an incredible global community of people building high-quality open-source audio effects and amp simulators, and injecting more energy into the Linux audio world, which, while plugging away for many years, could benefit from more bums and seats and code in repos. So, what is the bad voltage verdict? While still early days for the Mod Duo software-wise, the hardware is rock solid, and I have no doubt that this is going to become an invaluable tool for the recording or gigging guitarist. Keep your eyes peeled at this one, for sure.
For sure.
For sure.
For sure gonna keep your eyes peeled for that one, man.
Keep them peeled.
Actually, I gotta say, as someone who does not play guitar and never will play guitar because of my lack of what I like to call skills, this sounds fairly freaking rad. I mean, an open source effects box. I mean, this is awesome. This is absolutely the kind of crap I dig. This is great.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty cool device.
It really does.
The thing I really dig about it more than anything, like I said, is it just feels like the way they're building it and the way they're doing it is the right way. Like the team, not just in terms of like the hardware is great, and I like the fact that they're using Linux and LV2, and they went to the Linux Audio Developers Conference and all this kind of stuff. But for example, you know, the level of detail in the Kickstarter updates that went out, they showed loads of pictures of them building the units and talking about experiments that they tried that didn't work. They've just done it well. And so not just what the product is, but the model in which they're approaching it, I think, is something that we should, you know, applaud.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. When is it going to be like publicly accessible again? Is it going to be like available to the public fairly soon, kind of a thing?
I don't know, really. I mean, I saw on their website they had something about buying them, and they needed to sell 100 units to enter the first stages of production. I don't really know how it works. We can ask.
Well, they said once they build, it's right on the order page, because I was thinking about getting one. It's when they sell 100 units, they'll produce those 100 units, and they've sold 6.
Oh,
right.
Well, I mean, it is a niche. It's a niche. I mean, come on, it's a niche market, but it's still a really wicked cool. That's awesome.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not that small a niche, right? There are a great deal of guitarists, and presumably you can replace your whole pedal floor with just one of these.
Yeah, I actually think it's a really big market. I mean, it's niche in the sense that obviously it's Linux and LV2.
But no one has to know that.
But no, yeah, what's interesting is that their audience is musicians, obviously, who won't care about that. They'll judge this in the same way they'll judge, you know, a Digitech multi-effects thing or whatever else. But then, of course, this is really interesting to people like us, people, you know, and there's a reasonable number of people out there who are programmers and musicians who I think might be interested in, you know, checking this out.
Yeah, I mean,
so.
I thought it was pretty cool when you actually you can design your floor and you can chain multiple different pedals together. The fact that it'll tell you how much CPU each one uses so that you can avoid over delays and things like that. Like you can tell it's actually pretty well thought out from a engineering perspective.
I remember when I first saw the campaign, and they did a really cool like video that explained, like in I've run a couple of crowdfunding campaigns, and the video is the most important piece, right? And you got to communicate in 3 minutes all of the necessary information and do it well. They absolutely nailed it. That's one of the reasons why I backed it. But they showed the software of where like you drag these pedals and stick them out on the floor, and then you connect the cables together. And I thought there is no way it's going to be that nice. And it is. It works just like it is in the video. It's really pretty cool. So,
okay, Langridge's remedial class for musicians now in its second great episode. When you, if you go out and buy, say, a reverb pedal, right?
Yeah.
Presumably, if you buy, you might choose a particular kind of reverb pedal because you like that particular kind of reverb. Right?
Yes, yep.
So are the Mod Duo people doing deals with particular manufacturers in the same way that we were talking about with the amp thing last time? So that they can say this replicates this particular reverb pedal, or is it kind of you can replicate any reverb pedal you like? Here is a text box that you can type stuff into, which is not very musician friendly.
I don't believe they're currently I don't believe that there's in fact, I'm almost certain that there's no branded kind of effects on there. So, a classic example is the Ibanez Tube Screamer, which is a fairly common staple for a lot of metal and rock bands. This is a little thing that adds some gain. You plug your guitar in, you plug that into your amp. They have, like, the knockoff equivalent of it, but they don't actually have the Ibanez Tube Screamer. And I think they'd like to get to a point where they can do that. It's going to be a bit of an uphill struggle for them, I suspect, because a lot of those kinds of effects will already be VST effects.
Well, part of the reason I was asking is that potentially this is the foundation for a much bigger library of LV2 effects, right? I mean, the impression I have, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that anything you can do with VST, you can in theory do with LV2, but in practice, real companies who are out there really selling products with names you'd have heard of will quite often provide VST equivalents of some of their effects, but they don't do LV2 ones. So again, we're doing this looks like the real thing, but with the serial numbers filed off that we do with a lot of stuff, like GIMP is not Photoshop.
They do support a few other standards as well. We'll have to ask them about that. But it's I mean, there are some other standards they support as well. But yeah, the vast majority of branded effects are going to be from.
Next question. For most of it, you set the thing up and it under the covers, it's quietly plugging together a G-Stream, a pipeline, or however the hell it's doing it. I don't know, whatever. You said that occasionally you're seeing audio dropouts. Presumably, that's at least partially not to do with the selection of effects you've put together, but the underlying Linux audio system not being great. And presumably, if you're in the middle of a gig and you're halfway through playing through the Fire and the Flames, you can't stop and kill pulse audio on the device to make the damn sound work. How are they avoiding that kind of thing?
I find it difficult to believe you would ever have problems with sound under Linux. It never happens.
Also, impressive Dragon Force reference right there.
Nailed that
impressive reference, terrible band. But
how are they dealing with that kind of thing? I mean, they can pick their hardware, so they can pick something which is definitely well supported. But Linux audio is still quite a shambles at times.
I think I believe they're using Jack under the covers for this, and which is the logical thing. I mean, it's low latency.
I'd be surprised if it wasn't Jack. Yeah.
Right. I think where there are audio dropouts are probably just bugs, and also when the collection of effects that you've got are just pegging the CPU. So I haven't seen yet so they've got two types of plugins. They've got stable and unstable plugins, and with all of the stable plugins, I haven't seen them really test the CPU that much. I did install. So there's a open source project called GuitarX, which is basically like in the last show we talked about Amplitube and these kind of modeled guitar amps. GuitarX is basically an open source project that does something similar. One of the classic rock amplifiers is the Marshall JCM 800, and GuitarX have a plugin that does that. So I thought, I'll stick that on. But it's an unstable one. Put it on, completely worthless. Like this thing just completely destroyed the CPU. It wasn't just an audio dropout. It was rare when the audio dropped in. So I'm guessing it's probably just like some bugs here and there, and the plugins maybe testing it. There's been a couple. It's been pretty rare that I've had audio dropouts, but this is one of those things where they have to get that 100% right, because if you're in the middle of a show,
totally,
you cannot have that.
Yeah, that's what I said. Everything else about the UI, they want to make that as nice as possible, but if you have to struggle through that occasionally, it's fine. But if it's dropping audio, how nice it is to plug together your virtual pedals is irrelevant at that point, right? If it screws up a gig, it goes in the bin and no one ever uses it again. How much was it?
The other thing is, I can't remember how much I think I paid. I think it was $150, something like that.
Is that a good value for something like that?
I think $299 is the retail, because I think it was half off on the Kickstarter.
Yeah, and I'd say $299 for this is pretty decent.
How much would a pedal be? Presumably in your pedal floor you'd have 5 or 6, right?
Typical pedals are going to be like $100, $100 to $150.
So it's actually way cheaper.
Oh yeah, you get a lot more. You get a lot more bang for your buck by getting something such as this, and of course, it's expandable. And one of the things as well, like I've had multi-effects units in the past, and the user interface for them is awful. Like it's terrible. It's typical kind of like hardware, you've got to hold down this button for 5 seconds and then tap it twice.
Oh,
and then use the arrow keys to navigate between the menus. It's not pleasant. And this is way nicer because it's plugged into your computer. And of course, they have things like they have the plugin store and, where you can go and get additional plugins and, they've got ideas and plans around how people can share pedal boards with other people and you can refine them. So I think the cool thing with this is that you're not just buying this thing, but you're also buying the expandability of it in the future.
And you connect to it with a browser, right? So you don't need some special iOS-only app to configure it or anything.
Yeah, I plugged it in. I've tested it on Linux and on Mac, and you just plug it in. And it's a tiny bit hacky right now. You have to go to an IP address.
Now, here's the important question. What web server is that tiny little guitar pedal running? Is it? I mean, are we talking like full on Nginx? We talking like what?
I don't know.
What sort of crazy enterprise grade distributed web server are they running in there? I need to know the answer to this. We need to talk to them and find out what friggin' server it's running. This is important.
Well, how about we talk to the main man behind the whole thing?
Can we do that?
I think we should do that right now. So now on the show, we've got Gianfranco Cecchini, who is the founder and CEO of the Mod Duo that we just did a great review of. So, Gianfranco, maybe you can just start out by telling us how this whole Mod Duo thing came about.
Well, I played the guitar since I was a kid, since '89, and I've always been a lot into pedals, a lot. I had loads of pedals. And at one point when I started using the multi-effects, the digital ones, I started getting really fed up with first of all, the thing that some of them have a good distortion, but a crappy delay. And then another one has a very good delay, very good modulations, but the guitar sound sucks. And so I never got to the perfect one. And being always into the computer as well, I said, okay, why do I have these digital machines that I cannot change the software that's going on inside? I think that this is the driver.
One of the things that I think is really cool about the Mod Duo is that it's powered by LV2, which is this open plugin standard. And this has got the potential for like really kind of driving loads of innovation in like the music plugging world. Is that kind of a driving force behind why you set up the Mod Duo?
In a sense, yes. There is this, it's not my main goal, but we see that the Mod Duo can be like the killer app for the LV2. We can really bring a lot of new effort to the LV2 community. But at the same time, it's not. This is far from being our goal. When we think about the plugin format, we just chose the LV2 because it was an existing community and it's extensible. So technically speaking, it's a very good plugin standard for us. But we started with LASPA actually, way back there. When we started going into LV2, we said, okay, this sorts out most of our problems because of the extensibility. And especially this thing about LV2 that you have the DSP and the GUI totally separated. So this concept is very important for us because, after all, it's a headless unit. You don't have a mouse and a keyboard and a big screen. So it's cool.
One of the things that really blew me away about the Mod Duo is that because it was a Kickstarter campaign, is first of all, it shipped on time and within budget. But also the hardware is just really high quality and the software is really well integrated as well. Like, how did you go about pulling this off and actually doing Kickstarter campaigns right?
Yes, we didn't do on time and we didn't do within budget. Just to be clear. I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not a programmer. And I'm really into computers, but I'm not the person handling the code. I do all the mechanical parts of the Mod Duo. And I am totally obsessed about the quality of the hardware, Jono. This is one of the reasons we are here in Germany. We wanted to assure that we would ship something that has quality built into. Normally, when you see these electronics that they sell nowadays, these are all disposable gadgets. And so if it's going to last 1 or 2 years, actually it doesn't matter. But I get attached to my musical equipment. And so we wanted to have an equipment that, okay, I want to see people using the Duo in 5-8 years and still there, still rocking. And so it made lots of sense to try to ship something like that.
That's actually
I think that's where a lot of Kickstarters... Oh, go ahead.
That's actually a good question. You talk about you want people still to be using this in 5 or 10 years. Presumably, there's some way that I can get new LV2 plugins from some kind of store that you provide or whatever. But if Mod Devices goes away, the company, can I still use the device? Can I still put new things on it without the company being present?
Yep. The support for the LV2, it's a total support. I mean, if you don't have the LV2 extensions that we created, even though the plugin will load and work, the only thing you will miss is the fancy interfaces. We have a standard TunaCAN interface for the plugins that doesn't have a mod interface. And in order to publish the plugins, we have the tools are open source, so we have an SDK and a plugin builder. So you can set up this on your Linux box and deploy the plugins directly on your machine.
Nice.
That seems strange to me. I mean, haven't you heard? It's better to make hardware that's reliant on a server somewhere so that everyone gets screwed if you shut it down. That's what the cool kids are doing. I think maybe you missed the boat on this one.
Yeah, we are very conservative. we are old school.
Well, talking about that, the hardware inside the box, obviously the mechanical engineering of it, the enclosure and all that is very cool. But the hardware inside the box, did you have to find new hardware that was already supported under Linux, or did you pick the best musical stuff and then write drivers for it and send them to the kernel team, or what? How did that work?
It's more to the second option. We selected some codecs. Not a very scientific approach. Okay, it's much more okay. I know this brand, Cirrus Logic. They do very cool, very good quality stuff. So let's choose one of their codecs, and that's it. The reference that we had was with the internal codec that comes on the ARM chip. But now we are talking about a Chinese ARM chip. So when you read on the datasheet that thing it's 100 dBs signal-to-noise ratio. And then you get the Cirrus Logic codec, which is 103 signal-to-noise ratio. You say, okay, the 100 from the Chinese it's different from the 100 of the Cirrus Logic. Those are different hundreds. And when we got the codec, we had drivers for a similar one, but not for the one we specifically had. So we wrote the part of the drivers, and now we still have people working on the driver, actually, in order to get the best performance out of it. The problems that we have nowadays are much more related to the kernel, the RT patch, the real-time patch, and this working together with the driver, but it's being handled.
So obviously, if you want people to use this thing gigging, it's got to work 100% of the time and work well. What's your kind of experience been with not only the Linux RT stuff with the kernel, but just the kind of audio stack in general under Linux?
So I think that the Linux stack, the Linux audio stack, it's pretty stable. The thing is that one must take care is that you cannot rely on the cutting edge software. When I mean like a software that just be released, you have to be a bit more conservative. But I think that as you go for the older stable releases, everything is okay. I don't know. I find myself very confident about that. We actually had very little problems with that.
Nice.
The biggest problems we have normally are on the plugins. And so we do kind of a separation of the plugins, what we call stable plugins and what are not stable. And we communicate that to the users. Our official repository of plugins only have the stable ones, of course.
Right.
So you're a guitarist, yes?
Yeah.
Have you played any gigs with Mod Duo?
Not commercial gigs. I rehearse with it with some friends. And we do like Friday night gigs with friends. That's what I do mostly with it. Unfortunately, I cannot play seriously as I did it Now the work takes most of my time. But yeah, it's important for me to try to play a bit, at least once a week. I really wish I could do more.
So you've got on the website, it says that you want to sell 100 devices in order to go on to the next stage of the process. But that doesn't include the people who bought it from Kickstarter, right? That's 100 more devices.
That's for a new batch.
Right, so what's different about the new batch?
Well, the original one is the same that Jono has a Kickstarter edition, laser engraved on the bottom, and it's basically that. It's the same product.
So you haven't made any hardware revisions or anything of that nature?
We had to change one small resistor, but we did this for all the Kickstarter units as well. After they were done, we saw that there was one thing to change, and we changed it.
Oh, yeah.
Like manual process, so there's no difference from the shipped units.
One of the things I wanted to ask was how beefy is the computer in this? I mean, if because this
can it run Crysis? Like, what are we talking about?
Like, you know, I haven't tested this extensively, but to what extent? How complex and how advanced of a pedal board could you put together? I know it's a fairly broad question, but is the computer inside of the Mod Duo beefy enough to put together like 6 or 7 different kind of pedals at the same time?
Oh, for sure. It depends a lot on the pedals, Jono.
Right.
If you're using some pedals are really CPU hungry, and others are really light.
Right.
So if you're using very well written plugins that were coded in an efficient way and are stable, you can put 10, 12 plugins, no problem. We have a CPU meter on the bottom part so that you can monitor how is the CPU.
Yeah.
Other plugins, be it for they're not being well written, or even the operations like pitch shifters. Pitch shifters are CPU hogs. And these kind of plugins, I think that the pitch shifter by itself takes about 40 or 50% of the CPU.
Right.
So it depends a lot on the plugins. One thing that we are realizing is that there seemed to be lots of optimizations for ARM, but they are not good. For example, FFTs. When we had the Quadra that had an Intel CPU, we used the FFTW. And it ran amazingly well for the pitch shifters, for the emulators. And then when we switched it to ARM, we saw the FFmpeg had a way better FFT running on ARM than the FFTW.
Right.
So making these changes, like the Guitarix, the GX amp,
right.
It went down from 40% to 17 or 16% of CPU.
Wow.
So it's difficult to evaluate, but that's why we have the meter right around the screen, and it depends a lot. But in general and broad terms, yeah, you can do a lot with this CPU. And the CPU itself, because we couldn't get a more powerful one, especially because of software, we chose the 820, which is a 1 gigahertz dual-core CPU. But the way that we did the platform, you have the core board, is the computer itself. It's on a SODIMM socket. So you can remove it from the module and put a new one. And we want to sell these hardware upgrades on the future with more CPU power and more memory.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool.
That is cool. So you can upgrade the device after you've bought it. How are you handling... I mean, obviously for hardware upgrade, someone's going to have to take a screwdriver and undo the device and all that kind of thing. How are you handling software upgrades?
You mean when we do the hardware upgrades or general?
Just in general. Are you expecting that people will... Because people in general don't upgrade or even really understand the concept of upgrading an appliance like this.
Yeah, we already have problems like that with the current with the units we already shipped, because there have been already 4 upgrades, and not everyone did the upgrades. So we need to be more intensive on this part. Currently, the upgrades are doing when you download a file, you restart the Duo on a restore mode and and upgrade it. But we are going to build in this into the GUI. This is coming. And you're going to have a pop-up or something like that says, okay, you need to do an upgrade.
Yeah, there's a new version of the software for this. Just click here, and then it does it.
Exactly. It has to be something like that. Otherwise, people don't do it.
Agreed completely.
Very cool. So, just to kind of bring
one other question. The software for the Mod Duo is all on GitHub. It's all open source. Have you been able to do some of that for the hardware as well? I know you might be limited by the deals that you've got with your suppliers and so on, but is it open hardware in some senses?
The peripherals, we have this external protocol called the control chain that you use to connect to other the external controllers like the expression pedal or the external foot switch, the Arduino interface, and all the control chain part, it's all open hardware. So you have the files to do the PCBs, you have the mechanical drawings, everything is open source. But the device itself, Mod Duo, it's not open hardware.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to release it as open hardware, but as a very young company, this would scare a bit the investors. And so it's not time to do that now.
Yeah.
But I would like to release in the future. It would be awesome.
I would argue that you guys have already been more than open with what you've got. So I think that's a reasonable. I'm sure someone's going to yell. Yeah, someone's going to get on our forum and say, "No, it's absolutely terrible that it's not completely open." But
I'll do that just for fun. Hey, before we wrap this up, I want to ask one sort of metaphorical, philosophical question here. Would you say that what you have created is putting Linux inside of a guitar pedal or connecting a guitar pedal to Linux?
I think that it's putting Linux inside a guitar pedal.
The weirdest question I've ever heard. What was that all about?
It felt deep and meaningful, sort of Buddha-esque to me. So I'm fine with having asked it. I just want to go on the record as being fine with my earlier question.
We rarely get that level of seriousness out of Bryan Lunduke. This is it must be Zika. Well, Gianfranco, thank you for joining us. And I think we're all fans of what you're doing and the work that you're doing, and I hope some of our listeners will go and check it out. Where can people go and buy one?
On the website. The pre-sales are open. 10 units have gone. We have still 90 on pre-sale, and today a mailing has been sent. So the pre-sales must increase from today onwards.
Okay.
And that website is?
Oh, yes, www.moddevices.com.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Gianfranco, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you so much.
An awful lot of people in the open source world are kind of, our age. Bit younger, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily clear to me that there's a new generation coming up. I mean, to some extent there is. Anyone can point and say, look, you see, here's someone who's 20, here's someone who's 16, here's someone who's 22.
Right.
But do you think there's a groundswell coming up? It feels to me like the next generation of open source people is going to be smaller than ours. What can we do about it?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do, and I think everyone will agree with this, is that we need to be more inclusive as a whole, as a community.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
Of a variety of different things. And that's something that traditionally we have not been very good at. And it's something I think we're getting better at. Certainly not something we're good at.
But
I think that's
we're getting better, but I think we started from
fruit there.
Yeah, we started from such a low, appallingly undiverse position.
Getting worse would have been difficult, which is just a sad indication of where we started from.
Something better than totally shit is better.
I'm honestly not sure we're actually getting better at doing it. I think as a community, as the open source community, we are getting more aware of the fact that we are doing it. And some projects and some areas are making strides towards actually improving the matter, because but I think a lot of people are still remain to be convinced. Or
Well, it seems
actively
as well-
convinced in the wrong opposite direction.
One of the things that strikes me here is, when you look at a lot of people from our generation, people who kind of got involved in open source in like the late 90s and have been around for a bit, I think it's interesting to compare and contrast the environment of open source back then to how it is today. So back then, I would say in the late 90s, if you got involved in open source, it was probably because you were related to one of the like Linux or Apache or something like that. So a lot of people were building software that was running on open source operating systems. They were using open source tools, and they were using licenses such as the GPL. Whereas I'd say if you look at it today, a significant number of open source people, particularly like on the web side, they're not using the GPL. They're maybe using the APL or the MIT. They're not using open source operating systems. They're using the Mac. So the code that they're building is open source, and they like the collaborative element of open source, but their overall existence is not as defined by it. Like when I got involved, and I think it's the same for you guys, like I was so taken by it, like it defined me, and it became everything that I did. Whereas I think today people take just frankly more of a pragmatic approach to things. And they're like, yeah, I want to use a Mac, but I also want to make code that's open source, and I want to put it in GitHub or GitLab or wherever else,
I think the community has definitely, at least since I joined, gotten much more pragmatic and much less dogmatic.
Yeah.
So you see, I think I don't know that the bifurcation is there, but if you wanted to separate the free software people from the open source people, I think the open source group grew and is now what kind of permeates what is turned into now a large industry. And I think that's one thing that kind of separates it. Before, when I started using Linux in 94 or whatever it was, there was not a large industry there, right? There was Slackware, which was a company, but it was like Patrick in Walnut Creek mailing out discs. It wasn't Red Hat, who's now $1 billion, listed organization. So I think because of that, the culture's changed a little bit. And I think that's caused, kind of depending on what industry you're in now, then if you're in big data or something like that, obviously the new hotness is still open source. But if you're in a lot of different industries now, open source either has little to do with it or nothing to do with it. If you're an iOS developer, which is a lucrative area to be in now, you're developing on a Mac with closed source tools. And now they open source Swift, but that's kind of a new thing for them. But open source, you don't identify with as much. And especially if you look at a discussion we had in the show, when you talk about things like services that almost all are closed, open source I think we're losing the lessons we learned over the last 20 years in a way that's causing the community to not grow as big because there's less concern about open source now. I think all those services that are being built, all of which are closed, are all built massively on open source software. Right? Everyone who's building all of these services, they're all 95% of if you took the total lines of code in their service, 95% of it would be open source. They're all built on Python, because they're web services, and
there's
no real actually used language closed source for web services.
Exactly. But what's happening here, I think, is there are way more JavaScript programmers today than there were Linux programmers 10 years ago, or even almost certainly today. And anyone who's writing JavaScript in a browser is using open source stuff. They're using something like jQuery, or they're using something like Angular, or they're on the server side and they're using Node. It's all open source stuff, but they're not becoming part of a community because they don't identify the fact that what they're doing is using open source tools as being important. They're just a great big bucket of free stuff you get to reach out and use without any repercussions and without any money.
Yes.
I was going to say the same thing. Like, I actually don't think the community has shrunk. I think the community has got considerably bigger. What has shrunk is the
participatory community.
It's the kind of people who care about, like, who donate to the open source initiative and are interested in conservancy. A lot of the people who listen to our show, I think that enthusiast base has definitely shrunk. But
what does that mean for the future of open source as an ecosystem?
Well, I think it means there is no open source ecosystem. So I talk about the ecosystem of red things, right? The fact that stuff is open source is not actually of the key part of what it is. I mean, 10, 15, 20 years ago, all the software you used, what it had in common was that it was open source, and that was the most important fundamental thing about it. Now, the fact that a lot of the tools you use are open source, it's become so common that it's just not an interesting thing about the stack and the tools and the processes and the approaches that you use. The fact that they're open source is irrelevant. It's like the fact that they're blue. Who cares?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess, 10 years ago, when someone said something was open source or that free software or Libre, what that told you was less about the code, and it told you more about the people and the spirit of the people and their values and their perspectives, right? And these days, when you see something as open source, I think people think of it as a very functional thing. So to me, I think there is an open source community, and I think there is an open source culture, but it's not operating at a single thing that lots of projects sit within. I think it's operating at just individual projects. So to provide a comparison, GNU was supposed to be a big thing and has been a very successful thing with lots of individual projects that live within it, in the same way that KDE has lots of projects that live within it and GNOME has lots of projects that live in it. Now I think that people are they're working at the individual project level and they're doing open source within that. To me, that's the big difference. So I believe that the way in which you kind of equip the next generation of open source people is help those people to understand how to work on open source effectively, but to expect them to be part of a big movement is probably more unlikely than it
This is a dangerous direction for the conversation to take for two reasons. The first one is that
I know exactly where this is going.
The first one is that everyone who considers themselves a free software person rather than an open source person is currently jumping up and down screaming at their free open podcast player. That's because you abandoned the ideology of free software in order to rebrand yourself as the business open source, which no one cares about and has no ideology and no structure and no freedom, and that's what you get, and it's all your fault, Jono Bacon, right? And the second thing is, it does sound slightly a tiny little bit like we're bemoaning the fact that there are no longer any 14-year-olds waiting until they get old enough to grow their first neck beard and then compile a kernel, right? Which is neither of which are correct conclusions. But I don't know, I mean, to some extent maybe I just miss the kind of we're in this together underdog inclusiveness of what the community used to be 15 years ago, because now we no longer need to fight for the idea that open source should win, because everything I do is open source and it won, right? So maybe there is no open source community anymore.
What would be fascinating is to talk to somebody who has just got into the enthusiast space, like somebody who's just really got into Elementary or into Ubuntu or whatever it might be, and ask them, because I'm willing to bet that they've got that underdog spirit because they've just got involved. I wonder whether this is that the open source world has changed or we've just got old.
Oh, maybe we just got old.
Because I think part of it is as you get older, you're just I just want my comfy slippers.
You look at someone like Kira Banks, who's done a couple of talks at Scale, the conference. She's 16, I think, now, and she's been doing talks for the last 2 or 3 years at Scale. Yep. And she's very much invested with what you might call the traditional open source community spirit. I want to be part of this because I am what I am because of who we all are, and we're in this together and all this kind of thing, in a way that you don't necessarily see among the community of people hacking on Ruby on Rails code, right?
Yeah. Right. But I do think if you look objectively at the number of contributors you're getting to large projects willing to put a lot of time and effort into that project, it's definitely decelerating across projects. If you look at new kernel contributors, and you could say, the kernel community is toxic and whatever. But if you look at other communities that I would consider less toxic, the number of new contributors is not keeping up with attrition in a way that is a little bit worrying long term.
Really? I would have thought that it would have been the other way around. I have no data to put behind my viewpoint. I would have imagined just looking at how popular, particularly on the web side of things, looking at how popular these different open source web frameworks have become and how ingrained they are in how the business world, the Linux Foundation talk about, the major benefit of open source is that you can you can get 70% of the way of your solution, and then you build the top 30% kind of thing. And the business world has taken that by storm. I would have imagined that there'd be a lot of people, primarily because a lot of people are being paid to work in this, not just...
So I'm not including... Right, you look at a project like NGINX, which has grown phenomenally. Those are a lot of A, paid contributions, or B, companies that use NGINX at their core that are open sourcing modules to do with it. But I'm talking about...
So you're talking about volunteers?
Yes, correct.
Okay, yeah.
No, the amount of paid people is absolutely unequivocally by leaps and bounds growing.
But that's people who are into this because they're interested in being into it rather than because it makes business sense to be into it.
Yeah, now that's a good point. It wouldn't surprise me if that's reduced quite a bit.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Which I'm not sure what the long-term implications of that are. But it's... And you look at a lot of open source projects that are... Let's take one we talked about in the show, Jack. That's like a guy. That's not a huge open source project with all these contributions. Even though it's a great project, he does a ton of work. It's basically him.
It's called Jack because there's one guy called Jack.
to a first, it'd be brilliant if he was actually called Jack. I don't actually know. To a first approximation, though, as far as I can tell, every open source project is a very small core team of 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 4 people who do almost all the work. You can point to projects which aren't like that, but they are massively exceptions.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
So, do we think we can get back to that heyday is the question. And if so, how would we do it?
And if not, what long-term implication does that have?
Because the spirit of like people coming together united to challenge something, the spirit, like you said earlier on, Ak, about you missing the notion of being the underdog. That was a big chunk of the attraction, I think, for me as well.
Yeah, and it sounds stupid.
Premising human beings has not don't
want to suggest that there's a kind of elitist, you can only be part of this if thing. I think going back to the point we brought up right at the beginning about how we need to be much better at welcoming new contributors to the community and not turning people away. The fact that people are attempting to join open source projects and the open source community as a whole suggests that there is still that desire out there, and maybe we're turning so many of them away at the door. This is why, the community is 3% women rather than 50% women. The fact that if we fix that, maybe, there are all these potential contributors out there. They're just not getting near the community.
Yeah. Well, I think this would be an interesting conversation for the community.
I'm definitely curious what the community has to say about this one.
Yeah, I would love to hear from a few different types of people. Like, first of all, if you're new, like if you've been involved in open source for less than a year or two, what is it that attracted you to it, and why are you involved, and why are you participating? And secondly, what do we think we could do to kind of rekindle that that kind of excitement and that kind of bringing people together around a mission and all the rest of it? Like, how do you think that could happen? So, community.badvoltage.org, make the magic happen. So I just want it noted for the record that I think Bryan Lunduke is a terrible human being, wrong about everything, and has a shitty haircut.
You want that noted?
He leaves for 2 minutes and the whole operation.
I just wanted that noted. Well, so obviously he's not here for the outro as well. We record the intro and outro at the end of our recording sessions, and Bryan had to take off a little bit early, which some of you may have noticed is a theme these days.
And that's becoming quite a thing.
So the benefit of taking off early is the cost of us talking shit about you. So, it's a lovely guy, and it was really fun to have a big row with him earlier on. So,
that what's going to end up on a little poster on our Twitter account is going to be that second quotation and not the first one. Now,
oh, you're talking about the Bryan Lunduke branded Bad Voltage Twitter feed. So, yeah. So it was a fun show, I think. I think we got into some cool things.
Yeah.
I'm still excited about the Mod Duo.
I am increasingly deciding that I'm just not going to buy anything which flat out depends on a service. I'm just not doing it. The hell
you can basically buy nothing, because even cars are going in that direction. So,
well, I mean, I like the fact
you and
that
your marbles have a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is it, man. I'm going to sit here and play Mancala with the pebbles and the wooden bowl. The Mod Duo, I think, is really nice in that it doesn't require the service. I did wonder whether, if they pull the plug on the store, you'll no longer be able to install LV2 plugins or whatever. But there's honestly, if you wrote out a playbook of how you should do this kind of thing, really take care over the industrial design, build the software, release the software as open source, release as much of the hardware as you can as open source. Don't tie it to your service, but use the service to augment stuff. Make it so you can poke things into the device yourself. They've done everything right. It's just a shame that I don't give a shit about guitar, so I don't want one. I want to buy one just because it's nice.
Yeah, it's ironic that the show that we talk about the frailties of the product-service combination, we're actually talking to one of the few products that's doing it right.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I think I have the same viewpoint about Mycroft. Like, it's exciting when you see companies and projects doing this right, and we have a bit of a platform. It's nice to kind of showcase that.
Now, Mycroft's an interesting one because it's not clear to me, because presumably I'm going to get a Mycroft at some point relatively soon, because the first dev kit ones have gone out, right?
Yeah. Oh, you backed it, right?
Yeah, I did back it, but I didn't back it at dev kit level because it's for some other loony to get a half-working, we haven't written the drivers yet device and debug it, and then I get one that works, please. Thank you very much. But
same here.
But
I'll probably grab one. I think I found out about it the day after, so I'm not getting one. But I'll get one right when it comes out.
But at the moment, they've certainly been working on doing local speech recognition on the device. But as far as I'm aware, that's kind of we're working on that. The released Mycroft is not going to have that. It's going to do speech recognition in the cloud, which suggests that a Mycroft without that service is useless.
Right.
By the nature of what that device does, I think going into it, you're understanding that it's highly connected to cloud services. So that's not one of the cases where it's gray area to me, at least.
I agree that you understand that it's highly connected. It's able to be your administration tool for a bunch of cloud services or whatever. But if they, at the moment, I believe, if they pull the plug on the speech recognition service, your Mycroft is a brick. You can't do anything with it. And I'm not necessarily sure, in the same way that people with the Revolv, I don't think people necessarily know that. Now, the Mycroft team, the way they're mitigating that is working on local speech recognition. And I think if they decided to pull the servers 15 minutes after Mycroft got released, they'd say, okay, this is how you turn on local speech recognition. It's not going to be as good, sorry, but at least it works. So they are preparing. Their If I Die document says, if we die, this is how you turn on local speech recognition, and you live with the fact that it's not as good.
Right. Where I think with the Echo,
you
if
may
Amazon were to go out of
business,
business, you basically have a UE boom
before release. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we talked about. I think a lot of this is just about the way in which the company does it more than anything. And
I think to dovetail on that, part of it is that we're in early days for a lot of the segments of these devices. So there's a lot that just, I think, frankly, needs to be figured out. And it's going to take some growing pains. And as an early adopter, you almost have to be used to growing pains.
There's so much stuff which could be solved. If this whole idea of, look, we're not going to get screwed, the Works Offline consortium, or the Works Offline kite mark, brand mark, took off. So people competed on that, on their, Joey said half jokingly, let's set up the Works Offline consortium. But you can totally imagine branding devices with you are green, you are amber, you are red against this thing, and actually becoming a thing. And if you can make people compete on that, then that basically solves the problem, in my mind at least. There is potentially a future when every single thing on the market gets branded red and no one cares.
And I think the way you do that is you'd set it up as a separate thing. You'd find some companies who get the green one.
Yes.
And then you get them to put it on their packaging, and that would by definition pressure the other ones who I read Norring
Yes.
to pay more attention to.
The downside of it is I don't understand how you get paid by doing that. And if you say to people, oh, well, we get funded by the companies who are green, it's very, very difficult to then avoid that Chinese wall just quietly falling over, and then it becomes, the companies who are green because they paid for it.
Well, maybe Lunduke Enterprises will. He's pretty passionate about it. Maybe he'll set something up, and maybe he can have Certification Tycoon.
Well, there's actually an interesting question there. I mean, I don't know how you would go about setting up an organisation like this, because there's always a very kind of uneasy relationship between a regulatory organisation and the industry they regulate, and the kind of revolving door between the two. And I don't know how you do this, especially for something like this where it's privacy focused, but an awful lot of the stuff we've talked about around privacy and collection of data and data storage in the cloud and services, cloud services and devices that depend on those cloud services, an awful lot of that whole kind of thought process does kind of revolve around the have people understand what the problem is and then have companies compete to be better at it.
Yeah. Yep.
So maybe we need a consortium or a bunch of consortiums or a certification organisation who does this. And how do we set one up? How does someone else who isn't me set one up?
I was going to say, I know. How does someone else set one up? Because I don't give enough of a shit about it. So,
and I do, so I'll look.
Cool. Yeah. So, all right. Do we have anything else? I think we're about done. This is bumper show, long show. It's always good. You get your value for money here.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in a few weeks. Bye, everyone.